Psych. No, sorry.
Of course.
Of course.
It was unique.
About that money.
It's about that money.
That's a big spoiler.
Oh, it is?
I have to cut that out.
Oh.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I am joined again by YouTube's favorite dad, Matt Johnson.
Hello everyone, glad to be here.
We just recently watched The Woman in Black 1 and 2, and so we're going to talk about them a little bit today. Following the structure of our last video that we did together about Alfred Hitchcock, I'm just going to be going over the synopsis of each movie and then going into some fun facts, and then we will do our review. So we're going to start with The Woman in Black 1. Arthur Kipps, a lawyer, is recently widowed and grieving the loss of his wife. When he is sent to a remote village to When he is sent to a remote village to put a deceased eccentric's affairs in order. Soon after his arrival, it becomes clear that the villagers are hiding a terrible secret. Kipps discovers that his late client's house is haunted by the spirit of a woman who is trying to find someone and something she lost, and that no one, not even the children, is safe from her terrible wrath. Okay, so a couple of fun facts. This movie came out in 2012 and it is rated at a 67% on Rotten Tomatoes, not terribly high. This was Daniel Radcliffe's first film after the Harry Potter franchise, and the boy who plays his son in this movie is actually his real-life godson.
Did not know that.
And all the music boxes and the mechanical toys that you see in this movie are not actually props, they're genuine antiques from the era, so from roughly 1900 to 1905, which I think that makes it creepier.
It is creepier. I wondered where they got those things.
Yeah, because they look obviously very genuine because they are genuine. One of my favorite parts of this movie is the location and the fact that the tide comes in and out over this long expansive road, and so I did a little bit of research on the location because I was wondering if that was actually real, and I found the location used for the fictional Nine Lives Causeway is Osea Island's tidal causeway situated at the estuary of Blackwater River in Essex, England. And due to tidal conditions, the cast and crew were restricted to only working for 4 hours at a time. And then my last one, this was Britain's biggest grossing horror film in 20 years, so it did some numbers. So now let's just do some general thoughts maybe first. Did you like the movie?
I liked it. A 65 on the scale for Rotten Tomatoes. Probably around where I would come in on the film. Definitely worthwhile. Well, one of the things that drew me to it was we're big Harry Potter fans, so it was fun to see Daniel Radcliffe's first role. So I was very interested in that, and then the location that Kylie brings up was a big part of this movie in both the first one and the second one. I mean, you might not have been able to have this movie without the location, and I made that comment as soon as we saw it. It's just a great creepy circumstance, and the fact that the tide comes in and you can't go back to land at certain times. Didn't know in reality it was only 4 hours, thought it was more than that, but that just makes it that much creepier. I thought it was well done, thought the acting was good, had no problems with the movie. I thought it was an excellent horror film.
I agree with most of that. I think that why I love this movie so much is because of the authenticity, like I mentioned, with the actual antiques, and it was a real location. They did add some vines and whatnot to make the house, the mansion, look a little bit more decrepit and old, but it was a real location, as well as the little island with the tide coming in and out on that road, so I thought that was really cool. One thing though, I remember when I watched this movie back, I probably watched it for the first time in 2013 or 14. This was Daniel Radcliffe's first role after Harry Potter, and I couldn't help but notice all the commonalities between this movie and Harry Potter.
Yeah.
For instance, we noticed, oh my gosh, they're getting on a train that looks just like the Hogwarts Express.
Through the same kind of countryside.
Which it was. Yeah, because it was in England.
Yeah.
And then another thing that I noticed is that in the mansion, there was a huge wall that was covered in paintings, and when he was walking down the stairs, yeah, when he was walking down the stairs, it looked like he was walking through Hogwarts. I'm gonna ask you about your thoughts on his performance as well, but I think that he did a really good job, and the way that he was dressed, and especially his makeup and hair, he looked a lot more adult than he had in Harry Potter, and I believe that this came out just 1 year after the final Harry Potter. So I felt that his look was different enough, regardless of all of the commonalities that I noticed between Harry Potter and this movie, even though this was a horror movie and everything. I thought that there was enough of a separation, but I wanted to ask you, were you able to separate it, or were you
I wasn't
watching him?
No, I was able
Okay.
I was able to separate it. You know, amazing what haircuts, makeup, and clothing can do. He did not seem like the younger Harry Potter that he had played in the last film in the series. The other thing that was interesting, I commented to you during the film, was that, you know, he plays in this a courageous character again, a guy that does not seem to be nearly as fearful as you think he should be. He's not a big guy. He's an accountant. He's established as a guy that's fighting for his job and gets sent out into the Hicks to do this job. And yet I did a couple of times think about the fact, and said it out loud once to you, that he had some of the same characteristics that he did throughout the Harry Potter film. He was willing to look into all the spooky things that happen in this film.
Exactly.
And he never gave up, which was a serious trait of Harry Potter.
Yes, I mean, he was courageous. He was put in Gryffindor, obviously, so yeah, a lot of similarities. I think one reason why it reminded me so much of Harry Potter 2 is that this was a period piece and it was set in 1900. And I know that Harry Potter takes place in the 90s, but the castle that they live in is hundreds, if not thousands of years old, and so there's a antique-y kind of a vibe to Harry Potter as well. And I wanted to ask you something about period piece horror films. I'm wondering, I usually feel more frightened by period pieces, and I'm wondering if it's due to the lack of technology, the lack of accessibility to help and whatnot. But how do you feel about period piece horror? Are they more effective for you, or, you know, why not?
I think the older ones can be scarier. This movie is a perfect example. It's a great question to ask about this one. The telephone was just coming online in the world. Automobiles were just coming online. A few people had automobiles, not very many. In this particular town, they had one telephone, and it goes out during the film. They have to use the telegraph. You know they can't call 911. You know they can't pick up their cell phone. All of these different things that in a film set in the 21st century, if you're stuck on that island, oh, well, we can still use our phone, we can call 911, and there's a lot of choices that we have. But back in those days, you just don't have as many choices. And it makes it a little bit scarier because you know that they cannot be saved as easily by someone else in a lot of these circumstances. So I enjoyed that part of it, knowing that they couldn't just go grab the phone, or that they didn't have the access to a police or a hospital for that matter. In this particular little town they lived in, there was hardly anything there, let alone any kind of technology.
Going along those lines, on this topic, what moment frightened you the most, or was there something that really stood out to you, like a horror element in particular?
The island, the house in the island
Location
was the star of this film. In my opinion. I said to you when the second one started, I said it's got to be on that same island again, because that island was a star of the show, and it was a star of both the shows. If you see both of those movies, it will be one of the main things that you remember, in my opinion. Fantastic location.
That's why this is one that I'm able to rewatch and one that I wanted to show him. Okay, so on that topic, I think that one other thing that really stuck out to me, there were a couple different child deaths, because that went along with this ghost woman. The one that stuck out to me the most, that I always remember, that I think was the first one actually, was when the little girl drinks lye and she spits up the blood and dies in Arthur's arms.
Yeah, that was a quite shocking moment.
That was so intense.
Yeah, it was really pretty unbelievable. Although I put in my notes the girl that set herself on fire.
Yeah, that was very intense as well.
That was a child.
Yeah, which we've mentioned several times.
Freaky.
Children and horror, you know, they so often go together, and it's so effective and so disturbing to have children going through these things, but we've talked about that so many times.
We have, but the interesting thing about it, and we talked about this a little bit between movies, here was another movie that was as scary as it was because it involved children.
Yeah, I would agree, but I also love that they don't just rely on the deaths of the children. You have this amazing location, and it's almost a solo performance of Daniel Radcliffe in this house. Yeah. It all centers around him, and he's alone most of the time, and it's such an isolating feeling. Even though we were together and watching the film, you feel so isolated with him, and you can really identify with him in this movie, so I love that. Okay, so we're gonna get into some spoilers here because I want to talk about the ending, the final couple minutes of the film. You have been warned. Skip ahead to this time if you don't want to hear it. So in the end, Arthur Kipps and his son are hit by the train and they die, but then they are reunited with his wife, his child's mother. Would you consider that a happy or a sad ending? And how did you feel about it in general?
The ending stunned me the way it happened.
Right?
We were worried about his son arriving to this little town. If you're watching the movie, you're worrying about him. I wasn't necessarily worried about Daniel Radcliffe, actually. I was really just worried about the child because that's the way this movie was working to a large extent. Then it happens, then I'm not sure what has happened, and they give a nice pause until you realize Arthur and his son Joseph have been run over by the train. There is his wife, Joseph's mother. It was kind of a weird happy ending. I looked at you and said, whoa. You know, it was strange, but they treated it, the characters treated it as a happy finish to the movie.
And so I'm really conflicted because I'm happy for them that there is an afterlife where they can just be a family, but also this child never got to grow up and never will grow up. So I'm very conflicted because now this child gets to know his mother, but he's not gonna be raised by his mother because he's not gonna grow up because he's a ghost. I don't know. I'm very conflicted about the ending, so that's mainly why I was asking you your thoughts.
I thought it was just great because I didn't expect it. So
yeah.
Some endings are better than others, and this one came from nowhere. I would not have been able to predict it. I just couldn't. Sometimes you'd sit there and go, okay, I think this is going to happen at the end of a movie. It's even more fun in horror films, I think, than any other genre.
Yeah.
Probably. It was a good ending. Interesting ending.
It was a very interesting ending, especially because you had already breathed your sigh of relief because you went through this story with Arthur Kipps and he returned the body of the dead son to the ghost woman. He reunited their skeletons, their souls found each other. So you think that everything is happy. As soon as his son arrives, he says, you know what, we're not staying here, we're gonna go straight back to London. Seems great. And then it's the psych, no, sorry.
When they didn't get on the train that had arrived with his son and the nanny, I would have thought they were going to get on that train, even if it wasn't going back to London, which it wasn't. It was going to continue on. Based on what we knew, what Arthur knew, Daniel Radcliffe knew, he should have got on that train.
Yeah.
Instead, they say, well, we're going to wait. We're just staying here. And he tells the nanny, I'll talk to you about this later. We're going to get on the next train. And then, you know, okay, something's going to happen here.
Yeah. On that note, on the ending of that film, I think we can now transition to The Woman in Black 2, Angel of Death. So part 2 came out in 2015 and it only received a 23% on Rotten Tomatoes. And in part 2, it takes place during World War II. The London bombings forced school teachers Eve Parkins and Jean Hogg to evacuate a group of children to the Creithen. Okay, I still don't know how to pronounce that village name. It's Creithen Gifford. I'm gonna put it up on the screen. Creithen or Criffin?
I never did get it, so.
I didn't either. They evacuate a group of children to Creithen Gifford. When the refugees take shelter at Eel Marsh House, Eve soon comes to realize that they are not alone. The longer they remain there, the more the house's evil spirit threatens the children. With the help of a pilot, Eve tries to protect the children and uncover the truth behind the woman in black. I just have a couple of fun facts about this movie. There wasn't a ton about it online because I don't think this one really got very much attention. So the original script idea, it wasn't ever written, but the original idea was that Eel Marsh House had been converted into a mental facility for veteran soldiers. So it was going to be sort of like a psych ward kind of a vibe.
Well, that's why the beds were there and everything.
I don't know. I mean, that was just the original script idea. That's basically the group it was going to follow, I guess, is mentally ill veterans, but they scrapped
Probably
that.
what we would call PTSD today.
Right. Yeah. So they scrapped that idea and then came up with the orphaned children idea. And then Jeremy Irvine played the pilot, and this was actually his first horror movie. He's not super well known. You might recognize him from Spielberg's 2011 film War Horse. So I believe he was the star of that movie. I think that's all my fun facts. That might be it.
For fun facts?
I guess it is, and also, to be honest, not very many parts of this movie interested me, so I didn't even really know what to research, so we should just get into a review. So, do you want to give your general thoughts first?
I was glad to see the island.
Of course, the location.
Of course, that's where they're going to go, back to that island again.
Eel Marsh
Except
House.
now it's in World War II and there's nobody around. So none of the families with the children that were dealt with in the original The Woman in Black, nobody's there. And they've set this place up for this group of orphans children. They show up at this same familiar place again that we had we did a double header that night and saw them back to back. So I was glad to see that that location was going to be used. Curious to see what they could do with it. Thought they did a decent job. It wasn't as good as the first film, in my opinion. I don't know that it'd be quite as harsh as Rotten Tomatoes was. The character, the pilot, Harry, added a nice piece to it, little potential romantic part to it, and then he becomes a much more important part and a main character in the film as the film progresses. I enjoyed the movie, and there were some very scary parts, and this movie too, of course, revolved around ghost zombie children and the Woman in Black, of course.
Of course. It's hard for me to say that I liked this movie because honestly I don't like it too much. I appreciated some of the themes that they brought up because you have this orphaned child of war, and then you have this woman that takes care of these children, and she went through something pretty traumatic, having to give up a child that she didn't want to give up. And then you have this pilot who was the sole survivor of a really traumatic incident, and he wasn't able to save his fellow soldiers. So they bring up this really serious stuff, and I didn't feel like there was much resolve with it. If there was a lesson to be learned, or any follow through, I didn't pick up on it, but they brought up this really deep stuff, and it didn't seem to really go anywhere. Would you like to speak on that? Or
I think that he was definitely suffering because his crew had all drowned and he was the only one that lived through the crash. It gave him a chance to redeem himself. He eventually explains to her that he's afraid of water and what had happened, and that they had sent him to this fake airfield that they built with fake airplanes out in this far countryside of England so that the Germans would bomb it, even though it wasn't actually. So he was there by himself in a bunker, and then at night he would set fires and set airplane propellers going and things like that. But he got a chance to be heroic in this movie. He stepped right in to try to help them in the house as all of these things are going. He takes them back to the fake air base, and he becomes a tragic, heroic figure. So I felt like he got his chance to come back and feel better about himself in his own way.
to feel redeemed.
To feel redeemed, because he obviously had a severe case of PTSD, and I forget what they called it, but they had a word for why he wasn't a pilot anymore, and they had just shipped him out to this little town.
He got demoted.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking to his pilot demoted duties and that fake airfield, how did you feel about that setting as a horror setting? Did you feel that was effective, or?
It was unique. It was a strange way to do it, but it was one way that they could have this particular ex-pilot Harry be out there in the boonies completely all by himself and have a reason to be there. And then it could tie in his story, which I just got done talking about he ends up showing how heroic he can be to try to help the two women with the children and to try to save the children, and he does everything he can. He's a courageous guy until he...
That's a big spoiler.
Oh, it is?
I'm gonna have to cut that out. So on that note, now I want to shift to some pretty heavy spoilers. Those were some little light spoilers about the plot, but now we're going to talk about the ending. So if you don't want to hear this, go ahead and skip to this time. In the ending, Harry sacrifices himself to save the boy. What was his name?
Edward
and the woman. I don't know any of these characters' names. The main woman, the teacher, and Edward.
I was afraid that you were not Eve. You're talking about Eve. Eve and Edward.
Eve and Edward. So they're in the same location, right, where the woman in black and her son had drowned, right?
Yeah.
And I felt that the paranormal rules and what was going on had changed from the first movie. I don't know how you felt about this, but in the ending, Eve was convinced that because Harry sacrificed himself to the ghost children that were pulling him down into the muck, she seemed convinced that now the woman in black was gone. And that we found out that wasn't true in the very last frame of the movie when the woman in black appears in the mirror, but I'm just confused about that logic and why so much time passed between the woman in black coming back for them, because it seems like Edward would have died a lot sooner. How did you feel about the logic of this movie compared to the first one and sort of the paranormal rules that went on? Because I felt like they were a bit complicated in the second one.
It did not make as much sense to me in the second film.
Right.
And I can especially see if somebody had not seen the first film, how they'd really be mixed up.
But it's weird because I feel like they're both pretty standalone movies. They really don't have almost anything to do with each other. So because they both stand alone, I guess they felt that they could sort of change the rules a little bit. I don't know. It was weird to me. I don't feel like this was an appropriate sequel. It very much felt to me like a standalone. I don't know. Would you agree with that? Or did you feel that they were...
I don't know. I guess I could see it either way. I felt that, as I said earlier, that the island was the main star, and
right,
having them back there, the house and the island and the woman in black was still around, it gave enough continuity for me in that regard. But the way that it ended was strange.
The way that it ended with the woman in black appearing in the mirror, it seems like they were trying to set it up for a third one.
Right.
But this movie made less than $50 million in the box office, I believe, so there's not really much hope for a third. And I don't really think that we need one. I would have been perfectly happy just with the first one, with the one starring Daniel Radcliffe. I thought that was a great movie and wasn't expecting a sequel, and then this one came out in 2015, and I did see it in theaters because I was like, oh, cool, well, I liked the first one, so about that money.
It's about that money, but there were plenty of scary scenes in the movie.
Which one is the one that sticks out to you the most?
No, not off the top of my head.
Okay, so not quite as memorable as the first one, besides the house, obviously we mentioned. For me, the one that I remember, it's quite difficult to think of any others, but the one that got me and made me actually jump is when Harry is looking for Edward and he climbs into one of the fake planes, and then there's a little boy sitting in it and he thinks it's Edward.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
I won't say any more.
Yeah, that was a good one.
So that's the only one I can really remember off the top of my head though, so I haven't seen this movie since it came out in 2015, and I basically completely forgot everything that happened in it, so it's not super memorable, I have to say.
No, it's not. In fact, I'm gonna check my notes, see if I wrote anything else down that I felt was very memorable about it. No, I did not. I did not find anything else particularly memorable about it. I didn't get bored during the movie. It was a decent, middle-of-the-road horror film.
Yeah, it's fine. I'll rewatch it because I'll rewatch the first Woman in Black. And interestingly, I actually found another fun fact that is relevant. So I feel like this one wasn't quite as effective in its horror elements and whatnot because the director of this movie had actually never worked on a horror film before. Tom Harper was the director of the second one, and so I'm just not quite sure why they appointed him to direct this sequel, because the first one was directed by James Watkins, and he at least had worked on other horror movies like The Descent 2 and Gone. Yeah, that was one.
Which is interesting because there was a point where I made a comment to you partway through the second movie where I said, I'll bet this is a different director because it wasn't done as well as the first one.
I can't put my finger on it, but in the first film, the location of the Eel Marsh house felt very legitimate and real, and in the second one, it didn't look like a green screen, but it didn't feel quite so antiquated and old, but I can't figure out why I felt that way exactly. Maybe it was the lighting, because the second one felt a bit brighter. The first one was a little bit more dim and a little more depressing, I would say. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. One of the other things I forgot that had been invented since the first film was electricity. They actually had, and I noticed it, I'm sure you did too, when they opened the door, when they first arrived with all the children, they click on an electric light. And I caught that and I thought, oh, interesting. And then at some point while this caretaker is showing them around, he says, we don't have the electricity upstairs yet, but we have candles throughout it. I think one of the reasons that you feel that way about it is that in the first film, Daniel Radcliffe, Harry Potter, he was there by himself, and then he was back there again another time with the dog. A lot of it was shown at nighttime. In the second film, they were living in it. The house had been altered to actually have a classroom, to have an area, a dormitory for the children children to sleep in. There were not a lot of shots at nighttime that I remember. I remember more dark shots in the first film. So the house was not as scary because there were children and these two teachers living in the house, and they were outside playing at times. The island itself and the house were not as ominous as in the first film.
There was more life in it because of the children and whatnot. And also I think that goes back to what we were talking about how period pieces tend to be more frightening because of the lack of technology and such, so that kind of goes right along with what we were saying. I don't have any further questions about the second movie. I'm honestly not really a fan of the second movie, but I love the first one. Would you agree with the Rotten Tomatoes score for the second one? Because you mentioned maybe not.
I don't think I could score it that low. I might score it around a 40.
Really? I think I would give it around a 30, 35. Yeah. This one's it just wasn't my favorite. I just find myself getting kind of bored because I don't connect with any of the characters in the second one. They've been through some stuff. The three main characters, this little boy and Eve and the pilot, they have these really tragic backstories, and yet there was no connection for me. Those are just my feelings though. Please feel free to comment down below your opinions on these movies. I think we're gonna wrap it up, and do you have any final thoughts?
No, I don't.
Okay.
That kind of goes to show you about this particular movie, the second one, that we don't have a lot to say about it.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate because I hate when sequels are made just for the purpose of getting that box office cash, because then there's just not a whole lot to dive into. They're not super deep. They're not that interesting to talk about. So it's unfortunate. Do you have any final thoughts maybe about the first movie?
Well, the one thing I was going to say that you mentioned to me while we were watching the film is that the original Woman in Black did about 130 million worldwide. Mm-hmm. So it was a hit. So when you look at the fact that the second one, which usually still is going to make quite a bit of money, whether people think it's very good or not, did almost a third of it, kind of says something about it. Obviously, word of mouth was not so great.
Yeah, definitely. And people obviously flocked to the first one because it came out just about a year after the last Harry Potter movie, and it had Daniel Radcliffe, and he was actually the director's first choice to cast in that part. So he got real lucky with that one.
Yeah, he did. For a first film after the Harry Potter series, it was a winner.
And also it's kind of daring because not many people are fans of horror. I mean, there is a big community obviously, but in general, people aren't super big fans of horror. So for Daniel to step that far out of his current comfort zone with Harry Potter, that had made him so much cash, that's actually probably the reason, because he
was so valuable.
Yeah.
All you had to do is say that he was in this movie, and it was going to bring a large part of the audience.
Right, that's why I watched it.
I was surprised that I hadn't seen it before, to tell you the truth, and I was excited when Cassie told me that Cassie, that's her mother. When Kylie told me that he was in this movie and was the star, I was excited from the get-go because I wanted to see how he did, what it was like seeing him in a non-Harry Potter role. I have seen a couple of his more recent films that are much different than the kind of films that we're talking about in the horror genre. They're different types of films. He plays much different kinds of characters, but seeing him in this was fun, brought back a little bit of memories from the Harry Potters, and I thought it was a perfect role for him.
I think so too, and it's so awesome that he chose to take that role and has chosen so many oddball roles since then, because in reality, he made all the money that he's ever gonna need when he was 13 years old, probably, and so now he can just do whatever he wants and act the way he wants, take whatever roles he feels like, because, he's set, so.
And his film choices show it, really.
They really do.
If you look at the last 5 films he's done, they're all over the board.
They're very odd.
Yeah, and he plays some very odd characters, which the first one of my son, I can't remember which one it was very off-putting for me, because it's Harry Potter, and I don't know, he's a drug lord, and he's swearing, and I don't know, it's all kinds of things. He was definitely made a decision to break away and not be Harry Potter anymore.
Certainly, but I think that was definitely for the best. But we could do a whole other video about Daniel Radcliffe because we're very big fans and very big Harry Potter people. Yes. Let me know, maybe I was thinking about doing a video ranking all the Harry Potter movies, so if you'd like me to do that with my dad, let me know.
Yeah, that would be fun. He loves Harry Potter.
Big Harry Potter people. Okay, that is gonna wrap it up for today's video. I hope that you catch us on the next one. I post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5:00 p.m. But if you subscribe and hit the notification bell, you won't have to remember because you'll be notified every single time that I post. And sometimes I have videos with this cool guy, so.
And she's gonna be here for a while longer, so I think she'll let me do a couple more.
I think so too. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!
See you later.